Hi everybody, I'm Scott the Spurlock here to talk a little bit today about preparing for a big event and the steps I use and go through to get ready for one. So here I have the results from SCG Indianapolis pulled up, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the first thing I do when I start prepping and the team, we start talking about what we're going to do for an event, is we start looking at the last results for a big event. We went to Indianapolis, which was week 1, so we didn't have much to go on since it was the first week of new standard. But here are the results, and as you can see, the big decks were definitely Sultai mid-range, Esper mid-range, Mono Red. These were the big decks. So now I'm preparing for Dallas this weekend, and these are the things I need to be looking at when preparing for this event. So I know what decks to choose, what decks to test, all that good stuff. So that brings me to my second thing I do for getting ready for the event, is understanding the best decks in the format. And kind of, once again, the best decks would be, your Esper decks and your Mono Reds, stuff like that. As you see, you'll see a lot of them overlapping in the top 25 here. Sultai, Esper, Izzet Drakes, Mono Red, Gagarin mid-range. So these decks, I need to know how to beat them if I would like a chance to win this weekend. And so that comes into playtesting. So I take all this information I have, and that's gathered here in front of me, and then I start playtesting to figure out what decks fare the best against the best decks, and if I want to pilot one of these best decks, knowing my sideboard guide, knowing the ins and outs of each of these decks, and how to beat them. Because you always want to make sure you have a sideboard guide for whatever deck you're testing. That way you know how to the ins and outs when you're sideboarding and all that. Because if you don't, and you miss board, it can cost you games. So if I was to take, say, the Sultai list here, if I'm playing Sultai, I want to know what cards I need to bring in against Esper control and Mono Red. I would write down on a sheet of paper, because you're allowed to have 2 pages of notes. So in between matches, you can pull those out, look them over, and be like, okay, so I'm playing against, let's say, Mono Red. I want things probably like my Duresses, my Vraska's Contempts, things gain life, all that good stuff, and etc., etc. And so now I have this information, and I know how to play against Mono Red, and I have something to look back at after Game 1 and Game 2. So that's definitely a big plus, is just being able to have as much information when you're play testing and when you go to the event to be able to combat other decks and have a little extra confidence. After play testing the big decks and after I figure out how to beat them, I want to look at odd decks that maybe didn't have a big showing at the last event, but have a very good matchup against 60% of the field. Those are always decks to consider. Like, you have the Gate deck that's another deck that had a really interesting showing. Gates was not a deck anybody really thought about or was advertising prior to Indy. So it wasn't on anybody's radar. And because of that, these decks actually had a decent showing as well. I think one actually did top 64. So that's a very good information to have, is what odd decks can transition well and play against the top tier decks. So having that information helps a lot as well. So example, I would like to talk real quick before moving forward. Example of what we did. Team D&D, when we got to Indy, we pulled out all our decks, we started testing, and we start talking. we knew that Sultai was the best deck because of the information we gathered from the online results. Sultai was definitely one of the bigger decks, and Mono Red. Those were the two decks we wanted to be able to beat going into it. And the deck we started thinking about, hey, what would be really good against those decks? We thought, Esper control. We thought maybe Grixis control. And so after that, after Indy, we were like, okay, we were right. The best decks to be playing was probably Esper. And so we had a member, Ryan Steiner, preparing for the RPTQ. That is what he took. And he found that Esper was the good call. So having all the information in front of you, reviewing prior events, looking at Magic Online, Magic Arena, being able to have information going into the weekend is very, very important. And always take your time, look at that, do as much testing as possible, and make sure you have a sideboard guide, and give yourself time to process and understand the format, and you should do well. Thank y'all so much for taking your time to watch this. I hope this helped you, and if you have any more questions, always feel free to hit me up. I'm on Twitch all the time, Nova Murloc, and you can hit me up on Facebook. For now, y'all have a good one.